is 2 in the morning in Hong Kong, and in the most expensive housing market on Earth, a grown man is folding himself into a rented metal cage the size of a coffin, one of thousands stacked inside crumbling apartment blocks. Across the same city, wedged into a gap between two buildings, a young worker is asleep in a real bed, behind a locked door, inside a section of concrete water pipe originally built to carry storm runoff under a highway. So how did leftover highway plumbing become a home?
One architect's vision that may just make this pipe dream become a reality, literally.
And why do the people who live in one say the concrete is the least important part? To answer that, you have to go back to a riverside park in the small town of Ottensheim, Austria, in 2004. An artist named Andreas Strauss had spent years walking past the massive concrete drainage pipes stacked in construction yards along the Danube, the kind of industrial object human beings are trained not to see. And Strauss asked a question almost nobody had thought to ask. What if the most overbuilt, indestructible, unwanted object in the industrial world was secretly a bedroom? He took 3 sections of concrete pipe, cut a doorway into each one, and furnished them with a double bed, a lamp, and a wool blanket. Then he opened them to the public as a hotel. There was no reception desk, and there was no room rate either. Guests booked a door code online and paid whatever they felt the night was worth. Travelers arrived expecting a joke and left describing some of the best sleep of their lives, sealed inside 2 tons of concrete while the world carried on outside. The pipes shrugged off vandals, weather, and time because you cannot really damage an object designed to sit under a road for 100 years. For over a decade, the idea stayed a curiosity. Then it collided with the most desperate housing market on the planet. By the late 2010s, Hong Kong had run out of room in a way most of us can barely imagine. Average workers were spending decades saving for apartments smaller than an American garage, and more than 200,000 people were living in subdivided flats, cage homes, and units the local press called coffin cubicles. An architect named James Law, founder of a firm called Cybertexture, had watched this crisis grind up an entire generation. One day, driving past a construction site, he saw them. Massive concrete water pipes, about 8 feet across, stacked and waiting to be buried. Law realized he was looking at thousands of ready-made rooms that the city was literally planning to put underground.
I came across this idea one day when I was on a construction site, and I saw a lot of these big concrete water tubes left over on the site.
His firm bolted 2 sections together and built what he called the Opod tube house, about 100 square feet inside, with a bench that folds out into a bed, shelving that hugs the curved wall, a mini fridge, a microwave, air conditioning, and a glass front door that unlocks with a smartphone. The clever part was not the interior. The clever part was where it could go. Because a concrete pipe is strong enough to stack, Opods could be slotted into the dead spaces of a city, the gaps between buildings, the land under overpasses, the odd little lots no developer wants. Law imagined them as starter homes for the young.
It was very much designed for young people, and we think that young people don't cook very much these days, they just reheat.
And shelters for people the city had pushed onto the street, renting for a few $100s a month instead of a few thousand. So what is it actually like to wake up inside a concrete pipe? The first thing early tenants and visitors mention is the silence, and it is not an ordinary quiet. 8 inches of solid concrete does to sound what a bank vault does to daylight. Sirens, arguments, footsteps, all of it simply stops at the wall. Several people described the same strange first night, lying awake not because of noise, but because of its total absence. some of them cracking the glass door open just to let a little of the city back in. Because after years of sleeping with one ear listening, pure silence feels like a held breath. The second thing is the temperature, because concrete keeps its own schedule. That thick shell absorbs heat all day and releases it all night, which means the pipe is often warmest around midnight and coldest at mid-morning, long after the sun has come up outside. Residents learn to dress for the pipe's clock instead of the skies. In Hong Kong's humid season, the cool concrete never feels entirely dry, and a small dehumidifier hums in the corner of nearly every occupied unit. And the third thing is the shape. There are no straight walls in a pipe. Tape peels off the curve, picture frames sit crooked, and a shelf will only sit level if it was built for that exact radius. You can stand fully upright only in the middle 3 feet of the floor, and every new tenant learns the geometry the hard way, usually in the dark, usually with their forehead. There is no bathroom inside a pipe, and no real kitchen either. Washrooms and cooking happen in shared facilities nearby, which keeps the tube itself simple, cheap, and impossible to burn down. Now, before we cross the ocean with this idea, it would be dishonest not to sit with the criticism, because the criticism is loud and some of it is fair. Opponents do not even need a full sentence. They just say it out loud. We are housing human beings in sewer pipes. Design psychologists warn that 100 square feet leaves very little room for a bad day, that people need space to retreat and recover, and that quarters this tight can be genuinely stressful over time. Neighborhood groups fight these projects in council meetings over property values. And critics argue the deeper danger is political, that every cheap pipe hands a city one more excuse to never build the real apartments it owes its people. Even people sympathetic to the idea admit that some residents of tiny shelters everywhere vote with their feet, moving in, lasting a couple of weeks, and returning to a tent because after enough years outside, even a kind wall can feel like it is closing in. And yet, when you listen to people who have moved from the street into small locked shelters of any kind, the same 3 things come up, and none of them are the building. The first is sleep. Caseworkers describe residents realizing, weeks in, that their shoulders have finally come down from around their ears, that they can sleep through an entire night for the first time in years, and that a rested brain shows up different to a job interview, a doctor's appointment, and a phone call with an estranged daughter. The second is the address. You cannot get hired, open a bank account, or receive a benefits letter without one, and a shelter cot does not count. A numbered unit on a registered lot with a steel mailbox bolted to the fence does. And the third is smaller than you would expect. It is the key. More than one caseworker has described a new resident carrying their first key in a decade on a shoelace around their neck, checking for it the way other people check for their phone. A key means there is exactly one person who decides who comes through that door, and for someone who has spent years being moved along, that is not a convenience. That is a repair. Now here is where the pipe crosses the ocean. In 2019, an American concrete pipe manufacturer called Rinker Materials teamed up with the American Institute of Architecture students and ran a design contest with a name that gave the whole game away. They called it Pipe Dream. The challenge was to design a genuine tiny home inside an 8-foot wide, 16-foot long stormwater pipe, a single piece of reinforced concrete weighing about 30 tons. The winner was not a famous architect. She was an architecture student named Sandra Guyen, a single mother raising a 12-year-old son, originally from La Paz, Bolivia. And her reason for entering stops most people cold. When she was a girl, her mother used to playfully warn her that if she did not study hard, she would end up living in a pipe under a bridge. Decades later, her design for living well inside a pipe, with a real bed, storage, light, and a front door, won the national contest, and the finished home was rolled onto a stage at the International Builders Show in Las Vegas. Fully fitted to that showcase standard, a unit like hers runs around $35,000, and the interior can be installed inside the pipe in under a day. But strip the concept down to what a shelter program actually needs: a sealed liner, an insulated floor, a locking door, a vent, a bed, and a light, and the math changes completely. Culvert sections get cast wrong, ordered wrong, and stranded by canceled highway jobs all the time, and manufacturers will sometimes donate them just to clear the yard. Which is why, in a handful of towns, church groups and veterans organizations have begun experimenting with volunteer conversions, aiming at a total cost in the neighborhood of $2,500 per home. Picture what that build day looks like. A flatbed truck, a crane strap, and a crowd of volunteers in work gloves standing around a 30-ton tube that arrived finished from the factory. Because the hardest part of any house, the structure itself, is already done. The crane sets the pipe onto blocks before the coffee is gone. By mid-morning, volunteers are inside on their knees screwing down a raised wooden floor while a retired electrician runs a line for a light and an outlet. By evening, there is a bed, a battery smoke detector, a hook by the door, and a welcome card signed by strangers. Now, before we look at who these homes are increasingly built for, I want to pause for the people watching who are not just curious about this story. Some of you are one missed check away from it. Some of you have a brother, a daughter, or a neighbor sleeping in a car tonight. And a heartbreaking number of the people who end up outside are military veterans. On any given night, more than 30,000 American veterans sleep without a home. That is why we put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It walks through the emergency housing programs, benefits, and lesser-known assistance strategies that can keep a struggling veteran, or honestly anyone close to the edge, off the street entirely. We put it all in one place because these programs are scattered across a dozen agencies, and most people never find the ones they actually qualify for. You will find the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. If you are struggling, it may change your next 6 months, and if you simply want to help someone who is, it will show you exactly where to start. While all of this was happening, the picture of who actually needs these homes was quietly changing under everyone's feet. The fastest growing group of homeless Americans is not troubled young men. It is people over 55. Social workers call it the gray wave. Renters in their 70s priced out of apartments they kept spotless for 20 years. Widows who lost half the household income on the day of a funeral. Warehouse workers and waitresses whose bodies gave out a few years before any pension could catch them. Many have never broken a law in their lives. They are grandfathers sleeping upright in pickup trucks, and grandmothers keeping themselves presentable in gas station restrooms so the grandchildren never find out. For this generation, a crowded and chaotic emergency shelter is often more frightening than the car. But a small locked home in a quiet fenced lot next to neighbors their own age is frequently the only offer of help they will actually accept. And operators of tiny home villages say these older residents transform every community they join because they arrive carrying the one resource no program can donate, which is 50 years of practice at being a good neighbor. That brings us back to the hardest argument against the pipes, the claim that they are a tourniquet and not a cure. The claim is true. It is also incomplete, and the people making it are almost never the ones bleeding. A person sleeping outside in America dies decades earlier than the rest of us from exposure, untreated illness, and violence. Studies of chronic homelessness keep finding that leaving one person on the sidewalk can cost the public tens of thousands of dollars a year in emergency rooms, ambulances, police calls, and jail nights, while cities spend years and staggering sums per unit planning apartment buildings that the man freezing tonight will never live to see. The pipe builders are making a brutally simple bet. $2,500 and a locked door tonight beats a perfect plan in 5 years. You do not have to think that bet settles the housing debate. You only have to admit that the debate has been running for 30 years and the pipe took an afternoon. So think back to that worker asleep in his tube in Hong Kong. His home has no granite countertops, no hallway, and not a single flat wall to lean a bookshelf against. By almost every standard the housing market uses, it barely counts as a house at all. And yet inside that curved gray shell are the only things a human being truly cannot live without: warmth, safety, a key of his own, and a door nobody else can open. Here is the detail worth carrying out of this story. Every other cheap shelter humanity has tried, the tents, the plywood sheds, the fiberglass domes, eventually rots, burns, yellows, or blows away. A concrete culvert is engineered to hold back the earth beneath a highway for a century. Long after tonight's council meetings are forgotten, long after the people arguing about these pipes are gone, the pipes themselves will still be standing exactly where the volunteers set them down. The arguments have a lifespan. The concrete does not. If you want more true stories about the hidden ways ordinary people are solving impossible problems, hit subscribe, because next week we are meeting the Toronto carpenter who spent his own money building tiny, insulated shelters and placing them in city parks in the middle of the night until the city took him to court for it, and whose side the public took genuinely surprised us. We will see you there.